He ruled an empire built on fear, but nothing could prepare him for the sight of her walking into that ballroom, carrying the one secret that could destroy everything he had ever built. Tonight, Roman Dragunov would learn that power means nothing when the woman you lost is standing 20 feet away, and she is carrying your child. If you love stories about pride, betrayal, and the brutal price of power, stay until the very end. Hit that like button right now, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The ballroom was the kind of place that made ordinary men feel small. $300,000 worth of crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling of the Harrington Grand, each one throwing fractured light across the faces of people who had long ago learned to smile while calculating. The Prescott Foundation Gala drew the city's wealthiest philanthropists every November, and every November without exception, the guest list read like a directory of ambition dressed in evening wear. Senators, tech billionaires, old money so old it had forgotten what it once smelled like, and tucked among them, moving with the quiet authority of a man who owned the floor beneath his feet, was Roman Dragunov. He stood near the far end of the room, a glass of scotch held loosely at his side, barely touched. 41 years old, dark suit, no tie, the collar button open in a way that was either deliberate arrogance or genuine indifference. With Roman, it was always difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. His face had been called many things in the press over the years. Commanding, severe, the kind of face carved by a life of decisions most men never had to make. His jaw carried 2 days of shadow. His eyes, a pale gray that people consistently described as cold, moved across the room in slow, measured sweeps, cataloging exits, identifying faces, processing threat levels with the trained reflex of a man who had survived long enough to understand that relaxation was a luxury that got people killed. Beside him stood Vivica Hart. She was precisely the kind of woman who understood how to occupy a room. 44, a luxury property developer with a portfolio spread across 6 coastal cities, she wore a backless gown the color of deep water and carried herself with the polished ease of someone who had learned early that beauty was a resource to be managed strategically. Her hand rested on Roman's arm, light, deliberate, visible, the gesture of a woman marking territory rather than seeking warmth. "Senator Aldrich keeps looking at you," she murmured, her lips barely moving, her smile unchanged. "He always looks at me," Roman said. "He looks nervous tonight." "He should." She lifted her champagne flute and sipped without responding, because she understood, after 7 months together, that Roman did not elaborate unless elaboration served a purpose. He communicated in shorthand, compressed sentences, efficient silences. In the beginning, she had found it magnetic. Now, occasionally, she found it exhausting. But she did not say that. Roman handed his scotch to a passing server without looking at the man, his attention tracking across the room toward the main entrance where a small cluster of photographers had begun moving, the way photographers always moved when something worth capturing had arrived. Not the frantic surge that accompanied celebrity scandal. Something quieter, more electric. The kind of collective reorientation that happened when every person in a room sensed, without being told, that the temperature had changed. He noticed it peripherally. He turned toward the entrance, and then he saw her. Serena Vale walked into the Harrington Grand Ballroom alone. She wore a deep navy gown, structured across the shoulder, falling in clean lines. Her dark hair was pulled back. No elaborate arrangement, just the elegant simplicity of a woman who had learned that she required no embellishment. She was 37 years old, and she had always been, in Roman's private and carefully suppressed assessment, the most composed person he had ever encountered. That composure had once made him feel stable. Later, it had made him feel accused. Now, seeing her after 6 months of absolute silence, it made his chest tighten in a way he did not immediately identify. Then the angle shifted. A photographer stepped aside. A man near the entrance moved, and Roman saw. The gown was not architectural. It was accommodating. Serena Vale was visibly, unmistakably pregnant. The sound of the room did not stop. The orchestra continued. The conversation continued. The servers continued their careful navigation between tables. But inside Roman's skull, every sound receded to a flat, pressureless distance, the way sounds change underwater. His vision narrowed. His grip, which had been empty since he surrendered the Scotch glass, closed around nothing. He did not move. Vivica felt the change in him, the sudden complete stillness that was nothing like his ordinary stillness. And she turned to look at the entrance, and she saw Serena, and her expression did something complicated and brief before it smoothed back to composure. "Roman," she said, her voice carrying a note she worked to keep neutral. He didn't respond. He was doing the math. 6 months since the divorce was finalized. But they had been separated for longer. The formal separation agreement had been signed 11 months ago. Before that, the last time he and Serena had shared the same space without lawyers between them had been, he counted backward, and the number landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. 14 months. They had not shared a bed, had not been alone together, had not occupied the same room without professional intermediaries for 14 months. And yet Serena Vale was 7 months pregnant. By his calculation, possibly 8. The timing did not require a mathematician. It required only a man willing to look directly at what the numbers said. The child was his. He had not known. She had not told him. She had carried his child through the dissolution of their marriage, through the legal proceedings, through the media coverage, through 6 months of absolute post-divorce silence, and she had told him nothing. Roman Dragunov was not a man who was frequently caught unprepared. He had survived 2 federal investigations, 1 attempted hostile takeover of his legitimate business operations, and 4 direct attempts on his life across 15 years. He had built an organization that operated with surgical precision across 11 states. He had sat across tables from men who wanted him dead and made them agree to terms instead. He did not get surprised. He did not get caught standing still in the middle of a ballroom while 300 powerful people watched his face. He got caught now. Across the room, Serena accepted a glass of water from a server. She exchanged brief pleasantries with a city councilwoman she apparently knew. She did not look in his direction. Either she had not seen him or, and this settled into him with the particular weight of something true, she had seen him before she entered the room, had located him precisely, and had made the deliberate decision to behave as though he did not exist. That, more than anything else, told him everything. "Excuse me," he said to Vivica, his voice level, and he handed her his empty hand because he had forgotten he no longer held the glass, and she looked at his open palm for a moment before he withdrew it and moved. He crossed the ballroom with the controlled, unhurried stride of a man who could not afford to look like he was crossing the room because he was panicking, because he was not panicking. Roman Dragunov did not panic. He managed. He contained. He strategized at a pace that made other people's urgency look like disorder. He was also aware that 40 or 50 sets of eyes had followed Serena's entrance and were now watching him move toward her, and the social mathematics of the room were being calculated by everyone present simultaneously. He reached her near the east wall, 6 feet from a tall window that looked out over the November city, the streetlights below reflecting off wet pavement. She was speaking to the councilwoman, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Frances Huang, who had always liked Serena considerably more than she liked Roman, and she completed her sentence before she turned toward him. The completion was deliberate. She made him wait for 3 seconds, which was enough time for the entire exchange to be witnessed and interpreted. Then she turned. "Roman," she said. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, clear, even, carrying no particular inflection. She had a voice that gave nothing away, and she used it now like a wall. "Serena." He looked at her. Her face first, because that was where truth lived, and then at the obvious fact of her pregnancy and back to her face. He was not going to perform politeness. "When were you going to tell me?" Councilwoman Huang had developed a sudden intense interest in a passing appetizer tray and removed herself from the conversation with the practiced discretion of a politician who understood when she was in the vicinity of something that did not require witnesses. Serena held his gaze without flinching. "Tell you what, exactly." "Don't." "I'm attending a charity gala, Roman. I was invited. I'm here." "How far along are you?" She tilted her head slightly as though the question were mildly interesting rather than the only thing that mattered. "I'm doing well. Thank you for asking." "Serena." 8 months, she said, and the simplicity of it, just the number, no softening, no explanation, landed with the force of something deliberately aimed. "Our daughter is due in 3 weeks." "Our daughter." He had been prepared in some abstract way for a confirmation of pregnancy. He had not been prepared for the specificity of a daughter. Something happened in his expression before he could prevent it, and Serena watched it happen with the careful attention of someone who had been waiting a long time to see whether he was still capable of being reached. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said, and it came out flat instead of controlled, which meant his voice had slipped past management into something rawer. "Because I didn't want to." She said it cleanly, without cruelty, without apology, as a statement of fact. "And because I had every legal right not to. She's my child. She's my daughter." A pause, measured. "You'll have legal rights, Roman, when the time comes and in the proper manner through counsel. Tonight is not that." Behind him, he was aware of Vivica's presence at a distance, watching. He was aware of photographers near the entrance and several social journalists with phones raised. He was aware that this conversation was being observed by precisely the wrong audience, and that anything he said in the next 30 seconds would be reported, interpreted, and weaponized by morning. He was also aware that he did not, at this particular moment, care about any of that with his usual thoroughness. 3 weeks, he said. "Yes. And you were going to let me find out?" "What? Through a birth announcement?" "I hadn't decided." She said it with the directness of a woman who had stopped softening truths for him sometime around the 3rd year of their marriage, when she had understood that the softening did not help him and exhausted her. "That's honest. I don't know what I would have done. But standing here tonight with you in this room, with your girlfriend 12 meters behind you and 300 people watching, this is not the conversation." "You knew I'd be here tonight." A beat. "Yes, you came anyway. I was invited. I chose to come. The gala supports programs I care about." She took a slow breath, the kind that revealed she was managing her own internal weather with the same precision she applied to everything else. "I'm not here for you, Roman. I'm not avoiding events because you'll attend them. I've moved past that." The orchestra shifted into something quieter, more intimate. Across the room, someone laughed too loudly at something, and the sound reached them both like a signal from a different world. "I want to talk," he said. "I know. Tomorrow, somewhere private." "Have your attorney contact Miranda," she said. Miranda Graves, her attorney, a woman who had sat across from Roman's legal team for 4 months of divorce proceedings and had never once blinked. "She'll arrange something appropriate." "I'm not talking to you through attorneys, Serena." "That's the only way I'm talking to you right now, Roman." She said it without heat, which was worse than if she'd said it with anger. Anger meant engagement. This was settled. This was a decision already made and no longer under negotiation. "When you'd like to discuss our daughter's welfare in a proper legal framework, I'm available. Tonight I'm going to eat dinner and speak to people I came to see." She held his gaze for a moment longer, giving him the full weight of her composure, letting him understand that it was not a performance, and then she moved past him with the unhurried certainty of a woman who owned the space she occupied. Roman stood facing the window. Outside, the city glittered in the cold. His reflection looked back at him from the glass, fractured slightly by the condensation on the other side, and he did not recognize the expression on his face. He became aware of Vivica beside him. "Roman." Her voice was careful, the voice she used when she was calibrating. "Not now," he said. "People are watching. I'm aware. I didn't know she was coming tonight." "Neither did I." He exhaled once, controlled. "Go back to the table." "Roman." "Vivica." He turned and looked at her, and whatever she saw in his face made her stop talking. "Go back to the table." She went. He stood at the window for 2 minutes. He knew exactly how long because he counted the seconds in the way he had learned to count them during long operations, during moments when the only tool available was time and the discipline not to waste it on emotion. Then he walked to the bar, ordered a scotch he had no intention of drinking, and began the process of managing the rest of the evening with the competence that had kept him alive for 41 years. He did not look at Serena again that night, not because he didn't want to, but because looking meant wanting, and wanting without the possibility of outcome was a luxury that a man like Roman Dragunov had learned early not to afford. He was very good at not affording things. He was considerably less good, it turned out, at keeping the consequences of that habit from eventually presenting themselves in the middle of ballrooms at charity galas while 300 people took photographs. He did not sleep. His penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of the Cavalier Building on West Aldrich, 43 stories above the city. And it was the kind of apartment that communicated wealth through restraint rather than excess. Clean lines, dark materials, a wall of windows facing north. Roman sat in his study at 2 a.m. with the city spread out below him, and a glass of scotch he had actually drunk this time sitting empty on the desk. And he did what he always did when something required processing. He sat absolutely still and let the information move through him at whatever pace it needed. His daughter. He tested the phrase in the private space of his mind, with no one watching, no expression to manage. His daughter. Clara, Serena had said. He remembered from the legal proceedings that Serena's maternal grandmother had been named Clara, and the information surfaced now with the strange clarity of something that should have been obvious, but had somehow needed this moment to arrive. He had missed 8 months of it, the first appointments, the first ultrasound images, the first movements that he'd heard expectant parents describe in the way people describe things that changed them irrevocably. He had missed all of it. He had been attending meetings, managing operations, working through the transition of his divorce settlement, dating Vivica Hart, going through the motions of a life that he had told himself was adequate. And somewhere in the same city, because Serena had not left the city, he had confirmed this through channels he paid to stay informed. His daughter had been growing, and he had not known, because Serena had chosen not to tell him. He understood why, and understanding it was the part that made the scotch necessary. Their marriage had been many things. In the early years, the first 4, roughly, it had been the closest Roman had ever come to being something other than what he was. Serena Vale had been a corporate attorney when he met her, 28 years old, working for a firm that handled legitimate business contracts and nothing else. She had known what he was. He had not hidden it exactly, though he had managed the specific details with the careful discretion of a man who understood that knowledge could become liability. She had known the broad shape of his business. She had loved him anyway, which he had understood even at the time to be a specific kind of courage or a specific kind of mistake, and he had not been able to distinguish clearly between the two. He had tried in those early years to be worth that. He had not been worth it. Not consistently, not when it mattered most. The operations required decisions that compressed everything else, travel that lasted weeks and was not discussable. Associates who entered their home because business could not always be separated cleanly. Nights when he came back carrying something dark in his eyes that he could not name and would not share. And Serena had learned, Ichan, because she was exceptionally intelligent and deeply observant, that asking produced nothing useful, so she stopped asking. And when the asking stopped, something else stopped too. Some fundamental openness that had existed between them in the early years, before he became so thoroughly the thing he was, that the man she'd married occupied only a decreasing fraction of the total. By year 6, they occupied the same residence with the careful courtesy of 2 people who respected each other and had simply run out of the other things. By year 8, the separation was inevitable. Both of them understood it. Neither of them named it for 3 additional months. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, in the last period before formal separation, when they were still technically married and still, in the brief, desperate way of 2 people who can feel something ending, occasionally reaching for each other in the dark, his daughter had been conceived. And Serena had carried that knowledge through the lawyers and the asset division and the press coverage and 6 months of post-divorce silence. And she had not told him, because she had looked at the evidence of his life and concluded that the child was better protected by his ignorance than his involvement. That conclusion, Roman thought, sitting in the dark with the empty glass in his hands, was not irrational. That was the part he could not argue with. He could be furious that she hadn't told him. He was furious. The anger was there, contained, as anger in Roman was always contained, running hot and clean beneath the surface where it was useful rather than chaotic. But beneath the fury was something else, something older and harder to look at, which was the simple recognition that Serena's assessment of him had been accurate. He would have tried to control it. He knew that about himself. He would have made decisions about the pregnancy, about precautions, about how to manage the exposure of a Mafia boss with a child in the world who could be used against him. He would have been protective in ways that looked like control. because his protection and his control were the same mechanism. He would have made Serena's pregnancy into an operation rather than a human experience, and he would have done it with the best intentions in the world, and it would have been suffocating. Serena had known that. She had chosen differently. He put down the glass and pulled his phone from his pocket and looked at the contact he had not deleted and had not called in 6 months. Serena. Cell. Below it, 2 numbers he had added at some point during the marriage. Serena, Marshall Office, and Miranda Graves, both legal. He started to type a message, deleted it, started again, deleted it again. He put the phone face down on the desk. He was not going to text his pregnant ex-wife at 2 a.m. from an impulse born of shock. He was not going to be that man. Not because it would be strategically unwise, though it would be, but because Serena had told him clearly that the conversation would happen through proper channels, and every instinct in him recognized that honoring that boundary was, right now, the only thing he could offer that might matter. He sat in the dark for another hour. Then he went to bed, lay flat, and stared at the ceiling, and did the thing he had never been particularly good at, which was waiting. His attorney was a man named Frederick Holt, 60 years old, Yale-educated, with the specific moral flexibility of someone who had spent 30 years being paid extremely well to make problems disappear. Roman called him at 7 in the morning. "I need you to reach out to Miranda Graves," Roman said, standing at his kitchen counter with black coffee, still in last night's dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "I need a meeting with Serena as soon as she's available." A brief pause. "I heard about last night." "I need the meeting, Frederick." "Of course, I'll reach out this morning." "Roman, I want to be prepared. Are we anticipating a custody dispute or—" "No." The word came out harder than intended. He moderated his tone. "No dispute. We're requesting an opportunity to discuss co-parenting arrangements. Cooperatively. Tell Graves that clearly." "Understood." Another pause. "How are you?" "Call Graves." He hung up. He showered, put on a different suit, and was in the back of his car by 8:15, moving through morning traffic toward the Caldwell building where the legitimate side of his business empire occupied 3 floors. His driver, a man named Petrov, who had been with him for 11 years, glanced once in the mirror and said nothing, which was the correct response. Roman spent the drive handling the 23 messages that had accumulated overnight from his various lieutenants, business managers, and legal contacts because the machine did not pause simply because its operator was having a personal crisis. He responded to each one with the same efficient compression that characterized everything he produced, 2 sentences or fewer. Decisions made in the time it took to read the question. He was on the 4th floor of the Caldwell building, in a meeting about the quarterly reports of a commercial real estate holding company that served as one of his cleaner financial fronts, when his phone vibrated with a message from Frederick. "Graves confirms meeting. Thursday, 11 a.m. Serena's office. Strictly professional, no surprises." He typed back, "Confirmed." Then he set the phone face down and returned his attention to the quarterly reports, and the man across the table, a cautious accountant named Davies who had been managing these books for 6 years, watched Roman's face for any signal of the tension he was obviously carrying and found nothing, because Roman was very good at finding nothing when nothing was what the situation required. Thursday was 4 days away. He would wait 4 days. He was capable of that. He was not capable of simply waiting. By the following afternoon, he had compiled everything that was publicly available about Serena's current life with the methodical thoroughness that he applied to any situation requiring intelligence. Not surveillance, he made that distinction carefully in his own mind, understanding that the distinction mattered even if the methodology was similar. Serena had become, in the 2 years following the deterioration of their marriage and during the divorce proceedings, a public figure in her own right. Her appointment as interim director of the Harrington Charitable Foundation, a position she'd taken 5 months after the separation, had drawn media coverage. Her photograph had appeared in 3 industry publications. Her name came up in civic contexts, all of it publicly available, all of it telling him, in aggregate, a story about a woman who had rebuilt herself completely and deliberately while he wasn't watching. The Harrington Foundation. He stared at that particular detail longer than the others. The foundation was one of the legitimate charitable arms connected, not directly, not in any way traceable without sophisticated forensic accounting to several of his business interests. He had not established that connection with Serena in mind. The foundation was simply useful. It provided a defensible public face for certain financial flows, and its board of directors included several individuals whose goodwill Roman valued for business reasons. It was clean, or it had been clean. The problem that had been moving toward him like weather for the better part of 18 months, which he had been managing with the calm assurance of a man who trusted his systems, was that it was becoming progressively less clean. He had known for nearly a year that two of his business fronts had begun running financial activity through the foundation that wasn't properly documented. He had known because his own internal auditors had flagged it in a quarterly review, and he had tasked one of his financial directors with correcting the irregularities, and the correction had not happened with sufficient speed or thoroughness. He had applied pressure. The pressure had produced partial compliance and new irregularities that were more carefully obscured, which was worse. And now the foundation, and Serena, who was its interim director, who had no knowledge of the buried financial architecture she was sitting above, was connected to those problems. He had not fully reckoned with that particular collision until last night. Seeing Serena walk into that ballroom carrying his child had reorganized his priorities with a force that surprised even him. The foundation irregularities were no longer an operational problem to be managed. They were a direct threat to the woman carrying his daughter, and that changed the calculus entirely. He called his financial director, a man named Kostov, who had been with the organization for 12 years and whose current trajectory of partial compliance was testing Roman's patience, and told him that the foundation books needed to be clean within 30 days. Not better. Not improved. Clean. 30 days is tight, Kostov said. 25, Roman said. A pause. Roman, I'm not renegotiating. 25 days. If there are complications you can't manage, tell me now and I'll put someone else on it. Kostov assured him there would be no complications. Roman believed this the way he believed most assurances from men who were managing their own exposure, partially and with verification procedures in place. He was aware, more sharply than he had been 48 hours ago, of how many plates were in the air simultaneously, the foundation irregularities, the federal scrutiny that had been building around some of his property acquisition activity in the Northern Corridor. Vivica Hart, whose real estate portfolio was adjacent to that acquisition activity in ways that were professionally useful and personally complicated, and now Serena and a daughter who was due in 3 weeks and who would be, the moment she arrived in the world, the most significant vulnerability he had ever carried. He thought about that, about vulnerability. He had spent his entire adult life managing it as a tactical concept, identifying vulnerabilities in others, minimizing his own. He had a daughter now, and she would not be manageable in that framework. She would simply be his, and she would be out there in the world, and that would be a fact he would carry for the rest of his life, regardless of what happened between him and Serena, regardless of what legal arrangements were reached on Thursday morning in Serena's office. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Vivica. He let it ring, thought about her and what she was, and what their 7 months had been, and whether any of it could survive the specific gravity of what had happened in that ballroom last night. Let it ring 4 more times. Then answered. We need to talk, she said. I know. Not on the phone. Tonight, he said. My place, 8 o'clock. Fine. A pause that had edges. I just want you to know, Roman, I'm not going to pretend last night was nothing. I'm not asking you to. Good. Another pause. 8 o'clock. She hung up. He put the phone down and looked out his office window at the November city, gray-skied and cold, the streets below moving with the indifferent momentum of a place that did not stop for personal reckonings. Somewhere in this city, Serena Vale was going about her day. Working, probably. He knew her well enough to know she would not take a day of rest simply because of an uncomfortable encounter at a charity gala. She would have had the car service take her home afterward. She would have slept because her physician had certainly ordered adequate rest in the final weeks. She would have woken this morning and continued being the formidable, contained, fully reconstructed person she had made herself since leaving his world. She had their daughter, and she was fine. He was 41 years old, had run a criminal empire for 15 years, and was sitting in his office at 3 in the afternoon cataloging everything he had lost while he was busy winning. The conversation with Vivica lasted 40 minutes, which was longer than he expected and shorter than she deserved. She arrived at 8 as agreed, in a dark coat over a structured dress, her professional armor fully assembled, and she accepted the offer of wine with the manner of someone who had decided in advance how the evening would go and was managing toward that predetermined end. They sat in the living room of the penthouse, the city beyond the windows now fully dark, and she set her wine glass down after one careful sip and looked at him directly. "Is it yours?" she said. Yes. She absorbed that. He watched her absorb it, the controlled flicker in her expression, the brief tightening that passed through her before she smoothed back to composure. Vivica Hart was, in her own way, as skilled at managing her exterior as he was. It was something they had in common. It had made them compatible in certain limited respects. "She didn't tell you," Vivica said. "No. And now you know. And now I know." She picked up the wine glass again and turned it in her hands without drinking from it. "What does that mean for us?" He looked at her, at the careful precision of her, the controlled beauty, the managed ease, the professional fluency that was attractive, and also, he recognized now, with the particular clarity that crisis provided, a surface he had never gotten beneath. He liked Vivica. He respected her competence. He had chosen her 7 months ago for reasons that had at least partly to do with how thoroughly she was the opposite of Serena. Uncomplicated, undemanding, not someone who looked at him with the quiet, patient expectation of being truly known. Serena had looked at him that way. It had undone him. Vivica looked at him as a transaction, a mutual arrangement of status and convenience, and he had found that restful. He understood, looking at her now, that restful was not enough. "I don't know," he said, which was the most honest answer he had given in 7 months. She set the wine down. "Roman," her voice shifted slightly, lower, stripped of some of its professional varnish. "I need more than that." "I know. I'm not going to wait while you figure out what you want to do about your ex-wife. I'm not asking you to wait." The words sat between them. She looked at him for a long moment, and he looked back, and they both understood what was being said without anyone saying it. She nodded once, very slightly, the acknowledgement of something that had already happened. Then she picked up her bag. "I'll see myself out," she said. He didn't argue. He didn't offer comfort or correction or the particular form of negotiation that men deployed when they wanted someone to stay, but not badly enough to make the changes that staying would require. He let her walk to the door. He heard the click of it closing behind her. He sat with the silence. It was not empty. Silence in his experience was never empty. It was always full of everything that wasn't being said, all the versions of things that might have been different, all the costs that arrived with the calculations that seemed correct at the time. He thought about Serena, about 8 months of a pregnancy he hadn't known about a daughter who would be born in 3 weeks into a world she had not requested, carrying the weight of 2 parents who had failed at being a unit. He thought about the foundation and cost of, and the federal investigation that might or might not be moving closer, about the operational picture that required his constant management, about the men who worked for him and the arrangements that sustained a structure built on fear and reciprocity, and the unspoken understanding that loyalty was transactional. He thought about standing in that ballroom and seeing Serena's face when she turned to him, composed, clear-eyed, already past the moment before he had fully arrived in it. He thought, "I have been very good at surviving. I have been considerably less good at living." He did not know what to do with that thought. It was not actionable in any framework he currently possessed, but he did not dismiss it. He set it down in the part of his mind where things that mattered were stored, and he sat with the silence. And outside the windows, the city went on being indifferent, and his daughter was 3 weeks from arriving in a world he had built entirely around the wrong things. 7. Thursday came with the particular flatness of a November morning that has decided not to offer anything ornamental. No light, no drama, just a low gray sky and cold air, and the city going about its business. Roman arrived at the offices of Graves and Kerrigan on the 14th floor of the Delancey Tower at 10:55, 5 minutes early, because arriving late was a signal he chose to send to certain people and did not choose to send today. Frederick Holt was already in the lobby, his briefcase arranged with the studied neatness of a man who needed external order to counterbalance internal anxiety. They shook hands with the compressed efficiency of people who had done this before. Graves has set parameters, Frederick murmured as they rode the elevator up. No discussion of assets, prior arrangements, or the divorce settlement. Today's agenda is limited to co-parenting framework, communication protocols, and immediate medical logistics given the proximity of the birth. Fine. Roman. Frederick hesitated. I want to caution you. She is going to look for how you respond to limitations. Miranda Graves is very good at this. She's going to watch you for the moment when I know how to behave in a meeting, Frederick. A pause. Yes, of course. Miranda Graves met them in the conference room personally, which was a statement. She was 52, a trial attorney who had started in criminal defense before moving to family law. And she had the specific quality of a person who had spent decades assessing men who believed themselves to be the most important presence in any room. She assessed Roman with the quick, thorough efficiency of professional evaluation and offered a brisk handshake. Mr. Dragunov, thank you for coming on short notice. Thank you for making time, Roman said. Serena was already seated. She was at the far end of the conference table, and she looked, Roman thought, exactly like a woman who had decided in advance that this meeting would proceed on her terms or not at all. She wore a dark blazer over a pale blouse, her hair down today, and she met his eyes when he entered the room with the calm acknowledgement of someone greeting a colleague she had a complicated history with. Not warmth, not hostility, professionalism, applied with precision. Roman, she said. Serena. He sat. He put nothing on the table. He folded his hands. Miranda opened with the procedural outline, the agenda, the scope of today's discussion, the mutual agreement that both parties were here voluntarily with the intent of establishing a cooperative framework. Her language was exact and did not invite deviation. Roman listened. He was aware with every second of his listening that Serena was watching him, watching for the first sign of impatience, of the controlling instinct she knew him well enough to anticipate, of the man who managed situations by reshaping them according to his own requirements. He sat still and listened, not performing patience, actually practicing it, with the same deliberate effort that anything genuinely difficult requires. Our primary concern today, Miranda continued, is ensuring that Ms. Vale's final weeks of pregnancy are undisrupted and establishing a clear communication protocol for the birth and immediate postnatal period. Mr. Dragunov, you've indicated a desire to be present or available at the birth. Can you speak to what that means to you practically? He thought about the word carefully. I want to be reachable. If Serena decides she wants me present, I want to be available. If she decides she doesn't, I'll respect that decision, but I want to be in the city and reachable. Serena's expression moved very slightly, something in the precise, unhurried way he had stated it, the genuine subordination of his preference to hers, reached something in her that she did not entirely suppress in time. That's reasonable, she said quietly. Miranda made a note. They worked through the agenda with careful efficiency for the next 40 minutes. Notification protocols, the legal acknowledgement of paternity Roman was prepared to sign, the agreement on a formal co-parenting discussion to occur after the birth when Serena had recovered, the arrangements for Roman to receive updates. Frederick made notes. Miranda made notes. Serena spoke clearly, specifically, with the controlled competence that had always been her most reliable armor, and Roman responded to each point with the same measured directness. He did not try to renegotiate. He did not expand beyond the agreed agenda. When Frederick once began to raise a point about broader custody arrangements, Roman stopped him with a look and said, "Not today. Today is what Miranda specified." Frederick closed his notes. Near the end of the meeting, there was a moment, brief, unscheduled, when Miranda stepped out to take a call and Frederick moved to the window to review something on his phone, and Roman and Serena were, for the first time, functionally alone. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," Roman said. He said it quietly, without preamble, because the absence of attorneys for 4 seconds was the only opening he was going to get, and he was not going to waste it on formality. For the last 8 months. "I understand why you didn't tell me. I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not going to pretend I wouldn't have handled it badly, but I'm sorry you carried it alone." Serena looked at her hands on the table for a moment, then back at him. Her expression was very careful, the kind of careful that meant she was protecting something real beneath it. "I know," she said. Nothing more. Miranda returned. The meeting resumed. They completed the agenda, shook hands with the compressed formality of people who had managed something difficult without catastrophe, and moved toward the door. Roman paused at the threshold. He turned to look at Serena, who was gathering her folder, and he said, "Because it needed to be said, and there might not be another simple moment for it. Her name, Clara." Serena looked up. "It was your grandmother's name," he said. Something crossed her face, not quite softening, more like recognition. The acknowledgement that he had paid attention, that somewhere in the wreckage of what they'd been to each other, he had retained the things that mattered to her. "Yes," she said. "It was." He nodded. Then he left. In the elevator, Frederick began to say something about the positive progress of the meeting, and Roman looked at him once, and Frederick decided to review his notes instead. 48 hours later, Roman's phone rang at 11 p.m. with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. His protocol with unknown numbers after 10 was to let them go to voicemail and have them screened, but something, instinct, the particular alertness that had kept him operational through 15 years of calculated risk, made him pick up. "This is Margaret Chen," said the voice. "I'm a journalist with the Federal Examiner. Mr. Dragunov, I'm calling for comment on a story we're publishing in 48 hours about financial irregularities in the Prescott Foundation, specifically concerning the routing of funds through shell companies connected to Dragunov Holdings. We have documentation from 2 sources inside the Foundation's financial division. I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond before publication." Roman said nothing for 3 seconds. "Mr. Dragunov?" "I have no comment at this time," he said, his voice carrying not a single degree of the cold that was suddenly moving through him. "Please direct all future inquiries to my legal team." He gave her Frederick's contact line. Hung up. He called Kostov. Kostov answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which meant he had known this was coming. "Tell me," Roman said. The silence that preceded Kostov's answer. 2 seconds. 3. The particular quality of a silence that is someone marshaling an explanation for something they have been dreading told Roman everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. The irregularities were not contained. They were not on their way to being contained. They were, in Kostov's careful phrasing, somewhat more extensive than previously represented. And 2 members of the Foundation's financial division, neither of whom Roman had appointed, both of whom reported ultimately to a board structure that was less clean than it had appeared, had been speaking to federal investigators for the better part of 6 weeks. Roman sat very still. "How extensive?" he said. Kostov told him. Roman stared at the city outside his window, the same view, the same lights, the same indifferent dark, and understood that the picture he had been managing had just changed shape in a fundamental way. The Foundation was compromised, his financial systems were exposed, federal investigators had sources. And sitting at the center of the Prescott Foundation, serving as its interim director with no knowledge of any of this, was Serena Vale, who was 8 months pregnant with his daughter, who was, by virtue of her position, adjacent to everything that was about to become very loud and very public. He had 3 days before the story published. "Get your documentation in order," he said to Kostov, his voice completely flat. "Everything, every transaction, every record, every correspondence. You bring it to my office tomorrow morning at 7, all of it." "Roman, if I do that—" 7 in the morning, Roman said. "If you're not there, I'll take that as information." He hung up. He did not sleep. He sat at his desk as the city moved through its night outside the windows, and he began making calculations of a different kind than any he had made before. Calculations not about power or control or survival, but about what a man owed when the machine he built had begun moving toward people he could not afford to lose. His daughter was 3 weeks from being born. He had approximately 72 hours before everything changed, and for the first time in 15 years, Roman Dragunov was not certain that his usual methods were going to be sufficient. Kostov arrived at 7:03. Roman noticed the 3 minutes. He noticed everything that morning. The way Kostov's overcoat was buttoned wrong at the bottom, one button off from the top so the hem sat uneven. The way the man's eyes moved to the window before they moved to Roman. The instinctive search for an exit that people performed when they were afraid. Kostov was 55 years old and had managed financial operations for Roman's organization since Roman was 26, and in 12 years Roman had never seen him button his coat wrong. He set a leather portfolio on the desk without being asked, and sat down across from Roman without being invited. All of it? Roman said. All of it. Roman opened the portfolio. He read in silence for 4 minutes. Kostov did not speak. Outside the windows, the November morning was producing a thin, dirty rain that caught the gray light and made the city look washed out, provisional, like a set that hadn't been fully built yet. Roman turned pages. His face gave nothing. His breathing was even and controlled, and if anything about what he was reading was landing with force, it was landing somewhere beneath the surface where Kostov could not see it. He closed the portfolio. "Walk me through the Meridian accounts," Roman said. "Roman, walk me through them." Kostov walked him through them. The Meridian accounts were 3 shell structures that had been used, beginning approximately 22 months ago, to route funds from 2 of Roman's property holding companies through the Foundation's financial infrastructure. The routing had been designed to look like legitimate grant disbursements, money flowing from corporate donors through the Foundation to charitable programs. The programs existed. They were real. They had received real money. But the volume of funds moving through the channel was approximately 4 times what the charitable programs could account for, and the excess had been absorbed into a series of secondary accounts that Kostov had established without Roman's explicit authorization. That last part arrived with particular weight. "Without my authorization," Roman said. Kostov's jaw tightened. "You authorized the financial correction. I implemented the correction I thought was operationally sound. I authorized cleaning the books. You expanded the operation. I was managing exposure." "You were managing your own exposure," Roman said, and his voice was very quiet, which was worse than if it had been loud. "You were protecting yourself by making the problem bigger." Kostov said nothing. "And the sources?" Roman looked at him directly. "The 2 people talking to federal investigators. Do you know who they are?" A pause. "I have suspicions." "Give me the names." "If I give you the names and something happens to them, that becomes—" "I'm not going to do anything to them." Roman said it flatly. "I need to know what they've shared. That requires knowing who they are. Give me the names." Kostov gave him the names. 2 mid-level financial administrators at the Foundation, a woman named Paulson and a man named Trevat, who had apparently been documenting irregularities in the Foundation's accounts for the better part of 6 months. Their documentation had found its way to a federal financial crimes unit through a contact Roman did not recognize, which meant the channel had been established independent of any of his known networks, which meant the leak was clean and the investigators had been building their case without any interference from his side. He looked at the names on the paper for a moment, thought about Serena, sitting at the Foundation every day, working above this. Whether she had noticed the irregularities herself. Whether she had said anything. A cold thought arrived. He reached back into the portfolio and pulled out the earliest set of flagged documents, the initial internal audit notation from 14 months ago that had started the whole chain. He read the attached correspondence, stopped. There was a memo, written 8 months ago, 3 months into Serena's tenure as interim director. It was addressed to the Foundation's board chair, a man named Gerald Whitfield, who had been on the board for 4 years and whose appointment Roman had indirectly supported. The memo was 2 pages, clear and precise, detailing a series of financial anomalies in the Foundation's grant disbursement records that Serena had identified during a routine review. She had flagged specific account numbers. She had requested an independent audit. She had copied the request to 3 board members. The board had not responded, Whitfield had not responded, because Whitfield reported to Roman. Roman set the memo down. "She found it," he said. Not to Kostov, to himself mostly. "She found it and reported it and nobody moved." Kostov said nothing. "Get out," Roman said. "Roman, we need to discuss." "We're done discussing. Leave the portfolio. Get out of my office. Don't go anywhere I can't reach you." He looked up from the desk. "And Kostov, understand what I mean when I say don't go anywhere." Kostov understood. He left. Roman sat alone with the portfolio and Serena's 8-month-old memo and the specific, scalding understanding that she had tried to do the right thing and his organization had buried it. The woman carrying his daughter had identified corruption in a system he was responsible for, had followed the proper channels with the thoroughness of someone who took her responsibilities seriously, and the people he had placed in positions of oversight had ignored her because protecting his financial architecture was more important than a new director's audit request. He called Frederick. "I need you in my office. 1 hour. I'm in court until—" "Cancel it." A pause. "Roman, I can't simply—" "Frederick." He said the name once, with the specific weight that communicated the scope of what was happening. The weight that Frederick, in 20 years of working for Roman, had learned to read accurately. 1 hour. Frederick canceled his court appearance. Jed. The Federal Examiner's story published 39 hours after Margaret Chen's call, not 48. The extra 9 hours might have mattered. They did not have them. Roman was in his car when the notifications began hitting. His own phone, Frederick's phone, two of his communications managers simultaneously, the particular cascade of a story breaking across platforms, the initial publication followed by the pickup from larger outlets, the social spread that, in the current media environment, turned a financial crime story into a cultural event within approximately 90 minutes. By noon, Dragunov Foundation scandal was a trending topic in 4 states. He read the story in full in the back of his car while Petrov drove without being told where, circling the block in the slow, deliberate pattern that Roman used when he needed to read without destination. The story was thorough. It had documentation. It named the Meridian accounts. It identified the shell structures. It did not yet name Kostov, which meant the sources were protecting something, or the journalists were holding material for a follow-up. It did name Roman extensively, and it named the foundation, and by extension its interim director. Serena's name appeared in the 4th paragraph, described as a recently appointed director who had, according to sources familiar with the foundation's internal operations, raised concerns about financial irregularities that were not adequately addressed. He read that paragraph twice. She was not positioned as a perpetrator. She was positioned as someone who had tried to stop it. That was true, and it was important, and it had gotten into the story because the sources, Paulson and Travate, apparently knew what Serena had reported and had included it in whatever they'd given to investigators, which meant that somewhere in the federal case file, Serena's memo existed as documentation of her good faith. That was the only clean thing in the whole picture. He called Frederick. "Have you read it?" "I'm reading it now." "Her memo needs to be public. The one she wrote to Whitfield 8 months ago." "Roman, if we start releasing Foundation documents independently, that could look like—" "It looks like we're protecting her. That's what it looks like, and that's what I intend." His voice was flat and certain. "Find a legitimate channel, a legal disclosure, a cooperative gesture with investigators, whatever the mechanism needs to be. I want that memo in the public record within 24 hours. Her name does not stay adjacent to this without the full picture attached." A silence. "That's going to involve acknowledging the board's failure to respond, which leads to Whitfield, which leads— I know where it leads." "Roman." Frederick's voice shifted, the tone of a man who was about to say something he had been calculating the risk of saying. "If we fully disclose, we are cooperating with a federal investigation into your own financial operations. Do you understand what that—" "I understand it perfectly." "The implications for—" "Frederick." He watched the city pass outside the window. A delivery truck, a woman pushing a stroller, a group of students with their shoulders hunched against the rain. "Schedule a meeting with the Federal Financial Crimes Unit, voluntary cooperation. We're reaching out to them, not waiting to be subpoenaed. And contact the Foundation Board. I'm calling an emergency session, tonight if possible." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Roman checked the phone to confirm the call was still connected. "You understand," Frederick said carefully, "that voluntary cooperation in a financial crimes investigation of this scope is not something you can walk back." "I know." "And you've considered the full—" "I've considered it." Another silence. Then, "I'll make the calls." The board meeting happened at 7 that evening in the Foundation's conference room on the 9th floor of the Harrington complex. 11 board members. Gerald Whitfield at the head of the table, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who has spent the day calculating which version of events was most survivable. Miranda Graves was present as Serena's legal representative. Serena herself sat to Miranda's left, and she looked at Roman when he entered the room with an expression he could not fully read. somewhere between vigilance and the particular exhausted resignation of a woman who had been right about something catastrophic and derived no satisfaction from it. Roman sat. He did not sit at the head of the table. He sat in the middle of one side between Frederick and an empty chair, the position of a participant rather than a presiding authority, and he watched several board members recalibrate their expectations in real time. He spoke first. "I'm going to be direct because there isn't time for anything else. The Federal Examiner story is accurate in its core findings. Financial irregularities were routed through this foundation's accounts. That happened because of decisions made within my organization. I take responsibility for those decisions and for the oversight failure that allowed them to continue." He paused. "Let that settle. I'm also here to acknowledge that Serena Vale identified those irregularities 8 months ago and reported them through proper channels to this board. That report was not acted upon. I want to understand why." He looked at Whitfield. Whitfield had been, for 4 years, the kind of board chair who served a function, who showed up to meetings, voted with the interests Roman's people communicated to him, and collected the social currency of Foundation board membership without examining too closely what maintained the arrangement. He was not a bad man in the way that men who make active choices toward cruelty are bad. He was the other kind, the kind whose badness was a series of convenient inactions. "Gerald," Roman said, "why didn't you act on Ms. Vale's memo?" Whitfield's hands were flat on the table. The board felt that an independent audit at that time would have created unnecessary— "Who told you that?" A pause. "There were conversations. Who told you that an independent audit was unnecessary?" Whitfield looked at the table. "I received guidance that the concerns were being addressed internally." "From whom?" "From—" He stopped, looked up, looked at Roman with the expression of a man choosing between two bad options and selecting the less immediately threatening one. "From your financial director, from Kostov." Roman nodded, said nothing. The room was very quiet. Outside, the rain had intensified, and it struck the conference room windows with a sound like static. Serena had been watching this exchange without speaking. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, and her face was controlled in that precise way that meant she was managing something substantial underneath it. She looked at Roman now, looked at him directly, not with the careful professional distance of the Thursday meeting, but with the full weight of a woman who was reassessing something she had decided and was not yet sure what the reassessment meant. He met her eyes briefly, then looked back to the board. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "I'm engaging independent auditors, not Foundation-affiliated, not connected to any of my business interests, to conduct a full review of all Foundation accounts for the past 3 years. Their findings will be made available to federal investigators and to the public. I'm stepping down from any advisory role connected to this Foundation effective tonight, and I'm recommending to this board that Serena Vale be formally confirmed as executive director with full authority to oversee the reform process." He looked around the table. "If any board member has a conflict of interest that would prevent them from supporting that appointment, I'm asking them to resign their seat tonight rather than next week." 3 board members looked at Whitfield. Whitfield looked at his hands. Miranda Graves, who had said nothing until this point, clicked her pen once and wrote something on her notepad. Roman looked at Serena. "You don't have to accept it," he said. "The directorship. That's your decision. But the record should show that you identified the problem and you were right." Something moved through her expression. Not gratitude. She was too complicated for simple gratitude, and they were too complicated for it to land cleanly. Something harder. Something that looked, in the fluorescent light of the conference room with the rain hitting the windows, like the specific pain of being seen accurately by the wrong person at the wrong time. "I'll consider it," she said. But he was in his car at 10:15, Petrov driving him back toward the Cavalier building, when his phone rang with a number he recognized this time. Vivica. He answered because not answering had become a decision with its own momentum, and he was not ready for that particular momentum yet. "I've been watching the news," she said. Her voice was different from the last time. The professional varnish was completely gone. What was underneath was harder and considerably less controlled. "You're cooperating with federal investigators." "Yes." "Roman." A pause with texture. The specific quality of a pause that is someone deciding how honest to be. If they start pulling the Foundation's financial records, all of them, they're going to find connections to the Northern Corridor property acquisitions. He said nothing. My properties, she said. My acquisitions. The ones that are… Roman, you know what those transactions look like under scrutiny. I know what they look like. Then you know what full cooperation means for me. He thought about Vivica's real estate portfolio. The Northern Corridor acquisitions had been, from his operational perspective, a useful alignment. Her legitimate property development had provided cover for certain land transactions his organization needed to execute quietly. She had known the broad shape of the arrangement, the way Serena had once known the broad shape of his business. But Vivica, unlike Serena, had asked fewer questions because the answers had been financially advantageous to her. That distinction had seemed minor once. It did not seem minor now. You should get legal counsel, he said, independent of Frederick. Someone who is specifically yours. Roman. Her voice had an edge that was new. I'm not asking you for legal advice. I'm asking you what you're going to do. I'm going to cooperate with the investigation. Even if, he said. The silence lasted 6 seconds. He counted them. You're going to burn everything down, she said. I'm going to stop lying, he said. Those things look similar from certain angles. She hung up. He looked out at the rain-slicked streets, the headlights of passing cars throwing long reflections across the wet pavement, and he thought about what he'd just done, about the sequence of decisions that had begun with a phone call 48 hours ago and had moved, with the gathering momentum of something that had been inevitable for a long time, toward a point from which there was no return. He had called federal investigators. He had disclosed publicly. He had stood in front of a board of directors and accepted responsibility with his own name attached and no qualifications applied. He had given Serena the documentation and the position and the clean record that the truth required. He had not done these things strategically. That was the part that was strange to him, the part his mind kept returning to with the confused interest of something unrecognized. He had done them because they were the only things left that were honest, and somewhere in the last 72 hours, honesty had become the only currency that felt real. His phone vibrated. A message from Frederick. Investigators confirmed meeting for tomorrow, 9 a.m. Also, Vivica Hart's legal team reached out. They are preparing to provide investigators with documentation regarding her Northern Corridor acquisitions. Roman. They're going to position her as a secondary victim of your organization's operations. He read it twice, understood what it meant. Vivica was moving first, was going to construct a narrative in which she had been used rather than complicit, and that narrative would require casting Roman as the primary actor in every transaction they had shared. He typed back, letter. Frederick's response came in 4 seconds. Are you certain? He was about to reply when his phone lit with a different notification. A number he didn't recognize, but a name he did, because he'd stored it weeks ago from the Foundation's staff directory, the way he stored all information that might become relevant. Paula Reyes, Foundation admin. He answered. Mr. Dragunov, a woman's voice, young, shaken at the edges. I'm sorry to call. I got your number from… It doesn't matter. I work at the Foundation. I was at the board meeting tonight. I remember you, he said, though he did not. Miss Vale, after you left, she wasn't feeling well. A pause. She didn't want anyone to call you. She specifically said not to. But Mr. Dragunov, she's 8 months pregnant and she's been on her feet since 7 this morning and she looked… I just thought someone should… Where is she? Roman said. She went home. Her driver took her. But she was… I don't know if it's nothing, but she looked gray. He looked at Petrov in the mirror. Serena's address. Go. Petrov didn't ask for the address. He had it already, stored in the same careful preparation that characterized everything Roman's people maintained. The car turned. Roman sat with the phone in his hand and the city streaming past the windows. And for the first time in 15 years of managing crises with the cold precision of a man who had never allowed fear to have a practical use, he was afraid in a way that had nothing to do with strategy and nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the specific, unmanageable terror of someone who has just understood, too late and too clearly, exactly what he stands to lose. Serena's building was a 12-story residential tower on the east side of the Carver district, the kind of address that communicated serious money without announcing it. No doorman in a uniform, just a secure lobby with a key fob system and a concierge desk staffed by a woman in her 50s who looked up at Roman when he came through the entrance and understood immediately, from the way he moved and the quality of his suit and the specific expression on his face, that this was not a man who was going to be redirected. "Serena Vale," he said. "What floor?" "Sir, I can't." "Call her. Tell her Roman Dragunov is in the lobby. Tell her that one of her foundation staff called me because she looked gray when she left the board meeting tonight and she's 8 months pregnant. Tell her exactly that." The concierge picked up the desk phone. Roman stood with his hands in his coat pockets, and his weight evenly distributed and his face arranged into something that was technically patience. And he watched the concierge speak into the phone and then listen and then glance at him once with a look that suggested Serena's response had been approximately what he expected. "She says she's fine and doesn't require. Tell her I'll wait in the lobby until she confirms that in person." The concierge relayed this, listened again, set the phone down. "10th floor, she says 5 minutes. It was 8 minutes. He spent them standing near the window that looked out onto the wet street, watching Petrov idle at the curb below, and running the board meeting back through his mind with the cold efficiency of a debrief. What he'd said, what had landed, what Whitfield's expression had communicated, what Serena's silence at the end had meant. The 5 minutes became 8, and he did not move, did not check his phone, did not perform impatience. She came out of the elevator wearing a dark knit sweater over loose trousers, her hair down, her feet in flat shoes, and she looked, in the unguarded context of her own building lobby at 10:30 at night, like a version of herself that he had almost forgotten existed beneath the professional armor. She also looked tired in a way that went past the ordinary tiredness of a long day, the kind of tired that accumulated over months. She stopped 6 feet from him and looked at him with an expression that was exhausted and wary and not entirely hostile. "I told Paula not to call you," she said. "I know. I'm fine, Roman." He looked at her the way he looked at everything when he needed the truth rather than the presentation, straight, without social courtesy softening the edges. "You don't look fine." "I'm tired. I've been managing a governance crisis in my foundation while 8 months pregnant. Tired is appropriate. Has your doctor cleared you to be on your feet this long?" "My medical care is not your jurisdiction." "Serena," he said it quietly, "I'm not here to argue jurisdiction. I'm here because someone who works for you was worried enough to call a stranger at 10 o'clock at night." Something in her face shifted slightly. "Not much. Enough." "Come sit down," he said, gesturing toward the lobby seating, a pair of chairs near the window, visible from the concierge desk, entirely public, entirely appropriate. He was being very careful about appropriate. She considered this for a moment. Then she crossed to the chairs and sat, slowly, with the particular careful movement of a woman in the final weeks of pregnancy navigating furniture. He sat across from her, not beside her, maintaining the distance. "The board meeting was a lot," she said, after a moment. "I know. What you did tonight, the auditors, the investigators, stepping down." She looked at her hands. "I didn't expect that." "I know you didn't. I want to be clear that it doesn't have to change anything," he said. "I didn't do it to change anything between us. I did it because it was the only honest thing left to do." He paused. "And because your memo should have been acted on 8 months ago, and the fact that it wasn't is something I have to live with." She was quiet for a moment. "Whitfield told you Kostov told him to ignore it." "Yes." "Did you know? At the time?" The question was specific, and she asked it without any particular inflection, the way she had always asked the questions that mattered, plainly, so there was no room to misunderstand and no graceful exit for a dishonest answer. "No," he said. "I knew the irregularities existed and were being addressed. I didn't know Kostov had buried your report." He held her eyes. "That's the truth. I can't prove it to you, and I understand if you don't believe it." She studied him for several seconds. "I believe it," she said finally. "Kostov always operated with more autonomy than he should have. That's also on you, but differently." "Yes," he said. "It is." She exhaled slowly, one hand moving to rest on her abdomen, in the unconscious gesture he had observed twice now. the instinctive protective contact of a woman whose center of gravity had reorganized itself entirely around the life she was carrying. He watched it and felt something that he did not try to name because naming it would have required a vocabulary he had never properly developed. "Go home, Roman," she said. It was not unkind. "I'm going to eat something and sleep. I'll call Miranda tomorrow. There's going to be a lot to manage in the next few days with the investigation, and I want to do it right. I'll have Frederick available for anything the Foundation needs on the legal side. Miranda will handle it." A small pause. "But thank you." He stood. She stood more slowly, and he did not offer his hand because she hadn't asked for it, and offering it would have been a gesture she would have had to decline, and declining it would have cost her something small and unnecessary. He simply stood at the right distance while she found her balance. "Serena." He said it when she had turned toward the elevator. She stopped, but didn't turn around. "Get some sleep." She didn't respond, but her shoulders, which had been carrying the specific tension of managed composure, dropped by 1 degree as she stepped into the elevator. He noticed it. He thought it might have been the closest thing to rest she had permitted herself in a long time. He went back to his car. He was 2 blocks from the Cavalier building when his phone rang with Frederick's number. "Tell me," Roman said. "Vivica's legal team moved faster than I estimated." Frederick's voice had the quality of someone delivering information they would have preferred not to possess. "They filed a voluntary disclosure with the Federal Financial Crimes Unit approximately 40 minutes ago. Roman, they've submitted documentation of 17 transactions connecting her Northern Corridor acquisitions to funds originating in your holding companies. They're characterizing her as an unwitting participant." Roman said nothing. "There's more," Frederick said. He waited. "The disclosure includes a personal statement from Vivica. In it, she alleges that you pressured her to participate in the acquisition transactions by, and I'm reading directly, leveraging personal information regarding her business vulnerabilities that he obtained through the relationship. She is alleging coercion." The word moved through him like a temperature change. "She's claiming I coerced her," Roman said. "Yes. Into transactions she was fully briefed on and financially benefited from. I understand that's your position. It's not my position, Frederick. It's the truth." "I know." A pause. "But her documentation is substantial. She kept records, detailed records of every conversation, every meeting, including recordings that she—" Frederick stopped. "Roman, she recorded your conversations. Multiple, over the course of several months. She's provided those recordings to investigators." The rain outside had eased to a mist. The city moved past the car windows with its usual indifference. Roman sat very still in the back seat and let this information settle through him the way cold water settles, everywhere at once. Vivica Hart had been recording him, not recently, not as a reaction to what had happened at the gala, or the board meeting, or the disclosure decision. Multiple recordings over several months, which meant she had begun recording deliberately, systematically, at some point well before their relationship deteriorated. Which meant the decision had been made while he was still in her apartment, still at her table, still present in her life as something he believed was mutual. She had been building a case while he had been operating on the assumption of basic reciprocal trust. "How bad are the recordings?" he said. Frederick hesitated precisely long enough to convey the answer. "There are 3 that contain explicit references to the fund routing methodology. Your voice, specific account structures. The language is, the investigators will interpret it as direction, Roman, as you knowingly architecting the transactions. What do they actually show? They show you and Vivica discussing the acquisitions in terms that are, the best construction is deliberately ambiguous. The worst construction is instruction. Prosecutors will argue the worst construction." Roman looked out the window. A streetlight moved past, then another. "What do you need from me tonight?" he said. "Nothing tonight. Tomorrow morning, before the 9 o'clock meeting, I need 2 hours with you. We need to determine how to respond to the coercion allegation and how to contextualize the recordings." A pause. "Roman, I want to be honest with you. This has become significantly more complicated than a voluntary cooperation posture can cleanly manage. The coercion allegation, if it gains traction, changes the character of your role in investigators' minds from someone cooperating in good faith to someone managing a damage limitation exercise. I know what it changes. Then you understand that we may need to discuss 7 in the morning, Roman said. My apartment. Come early. He hung up. He sat with it. With all of it. Vivica's recordings, which had been accumulating in the background of a relationship he had believed was straightforwardly transactional. And the bitterness of that was specific, because he had chosen her partly for her simplicity, partly for the way their arrangement had seemed clean and mutual and unambiguous, and she had been making it anything but, quietly, for months. He thought, I chose her because she didn't ask me to be anything, and she spent 6 months making sure that if she ever needed to, she could make me into exactly what the record required. He thought, I have spent 15 years believing I understood the people around me well enough to not be surprised by them. He thought, Serena never surprised me this way. Serena's pain was always honest. He told Petrov to drive to the Cavalier building, and he rode the rest of the way in silence. The morning came with the sound of his phone at 5:47. Not Frederick, not Kostov, not any of the numbers his mind cataloged as operational. The number on the screen was one he had never received a call from, only ever sent to, Serena, cell. He answered before the second ring. It's Miranda. The attorney's voice was steady, professional, carrying no particular alarm, which was its own information. Miranda Graves was the kind of woman who would sound steady while reading a verdict. Serena asked me to call you. She's been taken to St. Augustine Medical. There were complications overnight, elevated blood pressure, some early labor indicators. She's stable, and the baby is not in immediate distress, but they've admitted her for monitoring. Which building? Roman said. He was already sitting up, already reaching for his jacket. Main maternity wing. She's in room... A pause. The sound of Miranda's voice dropped briefly, the sound of someone being spoken to at a remove. Then, Roman, she wanted me to call you. She didn't want you to find out through other channels, but she's asked that you not come to the hospital tonight. He stopped with his jacket half on. She said... Miranda paused again. He could hear the care with which she was relaying this, the precision of someone who understood the weight of each word. She said she appreciates that you came last night. She said she's not alone, her sister is with her. She said when there's something specific to tell you, she'll have me call you directly. She said please don't make this harder by sitting in a waiting room. He stood in the dim of his bedroom with the jacket half on, and the city dark outside his windows, and the phone pressed to his ear, and he understood that what she had done, calling him through Miranda at 6 a.m. to tell him she was in the hospital, specifically so he would not find out through other means, specifically to spare him the specific panic of finding out late, was an act of consideration that cost her something. That it was the act of a woman who had decided, in the exhausting middle of a medical admission, to think about what he needed even while managing what she needed. He did not deserve that consideration. He knew that clearly. Tell her I heard her, he said. His voice was level. Tell her I'll have my phone on all night, and that Frederick Holt has authorization to assist with any legal or administrative matters related to the foundation that come up during her absence. Tell her I'll wait. A pause. I'll tell her. Miranda. He stopped her before she could hang up. Is she actually okay? A beat. The doctors are managing it. She's strong, Roman. She always has been. He hung up. He did not go to the hospital. He put his jacket on fully and went to his study and sat at his desk in the pre-dawn dark with his phone on the desk in front of him and the city still sleeping outside his windows, and he stayed there. Frederick arrived at 7 and found him exactly where he'd been for an hour. Jacket on, hands flat on the desk, completely still. Frederick set down his briefcase and looked at Roman's face and did not ask the question that was obviously forming. She's in the hospital, Roman said. Monitoring. She's stable. Frederick sat down. I'm sorry. Let's work, Roman said. They worked for 90 minutes. Then Roman's phone lit up with a news alert that Frederick saw from across the desk and that Roman read at the same moment, and the room changed. Exclusive. Mafia boss's ex-wife knew about foundation fraud for months, sources say. New evidence suggests Serena Vale may have participated in covering up financial irregularities before going public. Investigators looking closely at her role. Roman read it. He read it once, quickly, the way you read something when your mind has already processed the shape of it before your eyes have finished moving. Then he read it again, more slowly, because the first reading had produced an anger so clean and so specific that he needed the second reading to confirm he had understood correctly. The story was thin. 2 unnamed sources. The evidence was vague. References to Serena having been present in Foundation meetings where financial structures were discussed. An implication that her memo could have been a preemptive cover rather than a genuine disclosure. The framing was careful enough to avoid specific legal claims, but aggressive enough to put her name in the same sentence as fraud and cover-up and Mafia. Frederick had gone very still across the desk. Vivica, Roman said. The sourcing pattern is consistent with, it's Vivica. He said it with complete certainty, not as an accusation that needed proving, but as a fact that had arrived fully formed. She was at the gala. She saw the photographs of me talking to Serena. She had 6 weeks of recordings of every conversation we had about the Foundation. She knows exactly how to construct a narrative that protects herself by making Serena look complicit. Frederick's face confirmed it. Roman stood. He was not doing the contained stillness anymore. He moved to the window, turned back, moved again. Not pacing, because he did not pace, but occupying the energy that the controlled stillness was no longer sufficient to contain. Pull the story. Find the journalist. Who wrote it? Roman. Who wrote it, Frederick? A man named Caswell at the City Tribune. He's been covering organized crime-adjacent stories for... Call him, not to threaten him. Call him and tell him that the Dragunov legal team is prepared to provide documented evidence. Serena's original memo, the board correspondence, the timeline of her disclosure, that directly contradicts every claim in that story. Tell him we want to speak on record within the hour. If we go on record, we're actively participating in the media narrative around a federal investigation, which our investigators meeting. The meeting is at 9. We have time. Roman. Frederick stood too, and there was something in his posture that Roman recognized, the posture of a man who was about to say something that he understood would be unwelcome and was saying it anyway, which was the most valuable thing a lawyer could do. Going to the press to defend Serena, publicly, on the same day that you have a voluntary cooperation meeting with federal investigators, while Vivica Hart's team has filed a coercion allegation against you. Do you understand how that sequence reads? It reads like a man who is managing a personal situation rather than cooperating transparently with a federal process. I don't care how it reads. You have to care how it reads. That's the entire... She is 8 months pregnant in a hospital, Roman said. In a hospital, Frederick, because she has been under chronic stress for months that my decisions contributed to. And right now there is a story running in the Tribune that is going to reach hospital rooms and patient ward television screens and phones, and it has her name and the word fraud in the same sentence, and it came from a woman who was in my apartment 2 weeks ago. I will not manage my optics while that story sits on the internet. Frederick looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. I'll get Caswell on the line. Roman turned back to the window. Outside, the morning had arrived with a flat, cold light that made the city look honest in the way cities only looked honest in early November, stripped of anything decorative, everything visible for exactly what it was. He thought about Serena in a hospital room. He thought about the Tribune story spreading. He thought about the meeting at 9 and the recordings Vivica had made, and the coercion allegation that was designed specifically to complicate everything he had tried to do honestly in the last 72 hours. He thought, she spent months recording me. She was building this the entire time. He thought, I chose wrong in every direction, and the people who are paying for it are the ones who deserved better. His phone lit up again, Frederick's prep call for Caswell. He turned from the window. He had 40 minutes before the federal meeting. One story to correct, one woman in a hospital he was not allowed to sit near. And somewhere in the building's administrative records of the Foundation that was now under federal review, Serena's 8-month-old memo, clean, specific, entirely truthful, waiting to do the only thing the truth could still do, which was stand in the way of the version of events that someone else had decided to build in its place. He answered Frederick's call. He began to speak. His voice was controlled and precise, and carried no hesitation, because hesitation was a luxury he did not have, and the window for doing this correctly was closing with the particular speed of windows that you did not realize were open until they were almost shut. The call with Caswell lasted 11 minutes. Roman spoke on record, and he did not hedge, and he did not use the careful, qualified language of a man managing legal exposure. He said that Serena Vale had identified financial irregularities in the Prescott Foundation 8 months ago, had reported them through proper channels, and had received no response because members of the board had been improperly influenced to suppress her disclosure. He said he was providing the journalist with documentary evidence, the memo, the board correspondence, the timeline, within the hour. He said that any suggestion that Serena Vale was complicit in the irregularities she had attempted to expose was false, and that he was prepared to state that publicly and under oath. Caswell asked him if he understood that he was publicly implicating his own board. Roman said yes. Caswell asked if he was doing this to protect his ex-wife. Roman said he was doing it because it was true. Then he told Frederick to send the documents and hung up. Frederick sent the documents. They had 22 minutes before the federal meeting. Roman changed his shirt. He kept 2 in the office closet for the specific contingency of needing to present differently than he had arrived, and drank half a cup of black coffee standing at his desk, and ran through the sequence of what had happened in the last 16 hours with the focused brevity of a man who needed to know exactly where he stood before walking into a room of federal investigators. The picture was this. Vivica Hart had filed a coercion allegation and provided recordings. Those recordings existed. Roman could not unmake them. What he could do was ensure that the context surrounding them was fully documented, that his voluntary disclosure had preceded hers, that the Foundation memo predated any investigator's interest, that his cooperation was not reactive but initiated. Frederick had assembled that documentation through the night. It was, in Frederick's careful assessment, a credible counter-narrative. Not a guarantee. A credible counter-narrative. Roman had also, in going on record with Caswell, moved from the posture of a man managing his legal situation to the posture of a man who had decided the situation did not deserve management. That distinction would register with investigators. Whether it registered in his favor depended on whether they believed it was genuine or tactical. He believed it was genuine. He could not prove that. Genuine was not a legal category. He put on his jacket. "Let's go," he said to Frederick. The Federal Financial Crimes Unit operated out of a building on West Calhoun that looked like every other federal building. Concrete, deliberately unimpressive, the architecture of institutional permanence rather than welcome. 2 investigators met them in a conference room on the 3rd floor. A woman named Agent Reyes, late 30s, who led the questioning with the controlled economy of someone who had conducted hundreds of these meetings and had learned to use silence as a tool, and a man named Agent Strand, who was older and quieter and whose job appeared to be watching Roman's face. Roman recognized the dynamic. He had used it himself, on the other side of the table, for 15 years. He sat. He folded his hands. He answered every question directly. The questions came in organized layers. First, the foundation structure, the board appointments, his relationship to the charitable programs. Then the financial routing, the Meridian accounts, the shell structures Kostoff had built. Then Vivica Hart. Then the recordings. Agent Reyes set a transcript on the table. It was 23 pages. Roman had not heard the recordings, but seen the transcript, his own words, extracted from conversations he remembered having in Vivica's kitchen, in her car, in the restaurant on Meridian Street where they had eaten 3 or 4 times, produced a specific cold feeling. Not because the words were incriminating on their face, because they were his words, and they were real, and they had been captured without his knowledge, in a context he had believed was private, and the violation of that was clarifying in a way he had not anticipated. He had built an empire partly on the ability to control information, to decide what was known and by whom and when. Vivica had removed that control from him in the most intimate possible context, and sitting in a federal conference room reading his own words back, he understood, with the specific exhaustion of a lesson learned too late, that the methods he had spent his life perfecting could be used against him with equal precision. Mr. Dragunov. Agent Reyes set a specific page in front of him. "I'd like to direct your attention to this exchange. This is from a recording dated approximately 9 months ago. You'll see the highlighted section." She waited while he read it. He read it. The exchange was 3 minutes of conversation from a dinner at Vivica's apartment. It concerned the Northern Corridor acquisitions. In the transcript, his voice discussed the timing of 2 property purchases and the financial mechanism through which the acquisition funds would move. The language was not explicit. It was the language of a man who assumed the person he was speaking to understood the subtext, which meant it read, to investigators who did not have that context, as instruction, as direction. This exchange, Agent Reyes said, is being characterized by Ms. Hart's legal team as evidence that she was receiving direction from you regarding the routing of funds in a manner she understood to be legitimate based on your representation. That characterization is inaccurate, Roman said. Can you explain the exchange? He looked at the transcript. He thought about that dinner, the apartment on the 14th floor overlooking the water, Vivica across the table, the easy surface-level fluency of two people who had never required depth from each other. He thought about what he had actually meant by what he had said, and whether that meaning was accessible to anyone who was not him, and whether it mattered. Vivica Hart was not an unwitting participant, he said. She understood the financial structures. She had legal counsel who reviewed the acquisition documents. She benefited materially from the transactions. He looked at Reyes directly. I'm not saying this to shift blame. I'm saying it because the characterization of her as coerced is false, and false information undermines your ability to build an accurate case. Reyes looked at him for a moment. Are you concerned about our case, Mr. Dragunov? I'm concerned about accuracy. A pause. Strand made a note. Reyes moved to the next page. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. When it ended, Roman and Frederick walked out into the November cold and stood on the sidewalk outside the federal building, and Frederick said nothing for 30 seconds, which was unusual. Well, Frederick said finally. Well, Roman said. You told them things that were not legally required several times. I know. The Meridian account structure, the Whitfield arrangement, the Kostov authorization chain. Frederick's voice was not accusatory. It was the voice of a man cataloging facts. You gave them a roadmap. Yes. Roman. He stopped. Started again. Do you understand that the roadmap you gave them today likely adds 18 months to the complexity of your personal legal exposure? I understand that. And you did it anyway. I did it anyway. Frederick looked at the street, looked back. He had been Roman's attorney for 20 years, and in 20 years he had seen Roman make many decisions that other men would not make, and he had learned to trust the calculation beneath each one, even when the calculation was not shared with him. He did not fully understand the calculation today. He could see it was real. All right, he said. They went to their respective cars. Done. His phone rang at 2:47 p.m. He was in his office, not working, sitting at his desk with the quarterly reports of 3 business fronts stacked in front of him, none of which he had opened, his mind moving through the morning's events with the slow, methodical repetition of a mechanism that needed to process before it could move forward. His phone rang, and it was Miranda Graves. She's asking for you, Miranda said. The doctors are... There have been some developments. Her blood pressure is elevated again, and they're talking about inducing. She wants you to come. He was standing before Miranda finished the sentence. I'll be there in 12 minutes, he said. He was there in 9. Bob. St. Augustine Medical's maternity wing occupied the 6th and 7th floors of the East Building, and Roman moved through the lobby and into the elevator and down the corridor with the focused velocity of a man who had decided that the only thing in the world that currently mattered was the room at the end of this hallway. A nurse at the station started to speak to him, and he gave her his name, and she checked something and nodded and pointed him to room 614. And he walked the last 40 feet of corridor with his hands loose at his sides and his breathing controlled, and he knocked on the door. Come in, Miranda's voice. He opened the door. The room was standard hospital, functional, pale-walled, the particular quality of light that existed only in medical facilities, neither warm nor cold but relentlessly neutral. There was monitoring equipment, an IV stand, a chair by the window where Miranda sat with her glasses on and a tablet in her hands, which she set down when Roman entered. And there was Serena. She was in the hospital bed, partially reclined, wearing a hospital gown with the monitoring leads attached, and she looked, not fragile because Serena Vale did not look fragile, it was not a condition she permitted, but reduced. Stripped of the controlled professional surface by a night and a morning of medical management, by the specific vulnerability of lying in a hospital bed with her body doing things she could not argue with or contain. Her hair was loose, Her face was pale and had the slightly damp quality of someone who had been through physical stress. And she was watching him walk through the door with an expression that contained no performance whatsoever. Just the direct, exhausted, unguarded assessment of a woman who had decided that the room did not have space for anything other than what was real. "You came," she said. "You asked," he said. He pulled a chair to the side of the bed, not too close, the right distance, and sat. He looked at the monitors without understanding half of what they displayed, and looked at her and waited. "The doctors want to induce tomorrow morning if my pressure doesn't stabilize overnight," she said. "They say the baby is ready. They say it's safer than waiting." She paused. "I wanted you here. I didn't know if I wasn't sure I was going to want you here. But when it came to it..." She stopped, looked at her hands. "When it actually came to it." "I'm here," he said. Miranda stood quietly, said something about getting coffee, and left the room with the discreet efficiency of someone who understood that certain conversations required the absence of attorneys. The room was quiet. The monitors made their soft, rhythmic sounds. "I saw the Tribune update," Serena said. "The correction. You went on record." "Yes. Frederick sent me the documents you released." A pause. "You didn't have to do that today. With the federal meeting and you had a lot of other things to manage. You were more important than the other things." She looked at him with the specific, searching attention she had always used when she was trying to determine whether she was hearing the truth or a version of the truth that had been processed for her consumption. He held the look. He had nothing to manage behind it. He had, somewhere in the course of the last 72 hours, run out of the energy required to manage his presentation, and what was left was simply him, the actual state of him, without the executive architecture. She must have seen something in that, because something in her face shifted. "Roman," she said, "I need to tell you something." She shifted in the bed, adjusting carefully, one hand going to her abdomen. "When I was writing that memo, the one to Whitfield, I was 7 weeks pregnant. I had just found out." She paused. "I didn't connect them at the time, the pregnancy and the foundation problems. They were separate. But later I thought about it, and I understood that part of why I was so precise about the memo, so careful to document everything exactly right." She stopped. He waited. "It was because I already knew she was coming," Serena said, "and I needed the foundation to be clean. I needed the thing I was building my professional future in to not be compromised, because she was going to be in my future, and I needed my future to be worth something." Her voice was steady but stripped of its usual evenness, raw at the edges, honest in the way that things were honest at 6 a.m. in hospital rooms. "I needed it clean for her, Roman, and instead it became the center of everything that's blowing up now. And I'm lying in a hospital bed because I've been managing the fallout for 3 weeks while trying to stay healthy enough to get her here safely." He thought about that, about the specific, terrible irony of it. The thing she had built for her daughter's sake becoming the thing that had destabilized the months before her daughter's arrival. "I'm going to fix it," he said. "You already started. I'm going to finish it." He looked at her directly. "Whatever it takes. The foundation will be clean. Not just managed, actually clean. Independent leadership, transparent funding, none of my organization's fingerprints anywhere in it. You'll run it on your own terms or not at all, and if you choose not to, that's your right. But the contamination ends. I'm going to make sure of that personally." She was quiet for a moment. "That's going to cost you significantly." "I know. The federal cooperation alone, I know what it costs, Serena." He said it without impatience, which surprised him. In the past, this conversation, the accounting of his choices, the enumeration of his costs, would have activated something defensive in him, some instinct toward justification or redirection. It wasn't there. It had gone somewhere in the last 3 days, and he was not sure when exactly. "I know exactly what it costs, and I've decided it's worth it." She looked at him for a long time, then she said, "She's going to look like you." He went very still. "The ultrasound. She has your jaw." Serena's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood, the compressed, reluctant amusement of a woman who found something genuinely funny in a situation that was also genuinely hard. "I've been trying to decide how I feel about that for 3 months." He said nothing. His throat had done something he was not going to acknowledge in a hospital room. "Roman." Her voice shifted again, quieter, more deliberate. "I'm not. What happened between us is not something that gets undone. I need you to know that I understand that. I'm not asking you to be something you're not, and I'm not going to pretend the last 8 years were something they weren't." "I know. But she's going to need a father." She held his eyes. "A real one. Not someone who manages the situation from a distance. And I need to know, before tomorrow, before she's here and it's real, I need to know if you're actually capable of that." The question landed exactly where she intended it to land, which was in the specific, unprotected place where Roman kept the things he had never been willing to look at directly. Whether he was capable of it, not whether he wanted to be, not whether he intended to be, whether he actually possessed the capacity for a kind of sustained, uncontrolled love that did not have a strategic component. He did not know. He said, "I don't know. I know I want to be. I know I've never wanted anything more clearly than I've wanted this in the last 3 days." He paused. "I know that's not the same as being sure." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she exhaled slowly. The exhale of someone setting something down. "It's enough," she said quietly, "that you can say that honestly. It's enough." Miranda returned with coffee, and the conversation shifted into the practical, the logistics of tomorrow, the doctor's schedule, what Roman's presence would look like and in what capacity. He answered each question with the same focused precision he had brought to the morning's federal meeting, and if there was something in his voice that had not been there in the morning, neither Miranda nor Serena named it, and he did not name it himself. He left the hospital at 6 p.m. because Serena needed to sleep, and her sister had arrived. A woman named Dana, who had looked at Roman in the corridor with the particular comprehensive evaluation of a sibling who had spent 8 years accumulating opinions about someone and was now seeing him in person for the first time in over a year. He met her eyes and nodded, and she nodded back, which was not warmth but was a form of temporary truce, and he went down to the lobby. He stood outside the hospital entrance in the cold air and called Petrov. While he waited for the car, his phone rang with a number that resolved on the second ring as one of his underbosses, a man named Gallo, who ran the Eastern District operations and who called Roman approximately twice a year, only when something was wrong enough to warrant it. "We have a problem," Gallo said. "Tell me." "Marchetti is moving." A pause. "Tonight." Roman's hand tightened on the phone. Dmitry Marchetti ran a competing organization out of the Port District, smaller than Roman's, more aggressive, opportunistic in the way of organizations that survived by identifying moments of weakness in larger ones. Roman's voluntary cooperation with federal investigators had apparently communicated, to Marchetti's intelligence, exactly the kind of institutional distraction that an opportunistic organization found appetizing. "What does moving mean?" Roman said. "3 of our distribution arrangements in the southern corridor. He's made contact with the principals, offering terms." "Which principals?" Gallo named them. Roman stood outside the hospital with the November cold against his face, and the sound of the city around him and the monitoring equipment sounds still somewhere in his memory from the 6th floor, and he ran the calculation. 3 principals. Southern corridor. If Marchetti secured those arrangements, the revenue impact was manageable. Not catastrophic, not immediately. But the signal it sent, the demonstration that Roman's organization could be picked apart while he was occupied, would invite further aggression. Other opportunists. The structure that had taken 15 years to build depended partly on the perception that it was untouchable, and perceptions, once damaged, had their own momentum. The old calculation would have produced one response, a demonstration, something that communicated clearly and irrevocably that Roman Dragunov was not distracted, that the organization was not weakened, that the cost of opportunism was too high to be worth the attempt. He stood outside the hospital and thought about Serena on the 6th floor, about Clara, who was going to look like him, about the federal investigators who had watched him spend 2 hours and 40 minutes dismantling his own architecture because it was the only honest thing left to do. "Tell the principals we'll match whatever Marchetti is offering," he said. "Better terms. Tell them I'll meet with each of them personally this week." A pause. "That's it?" "That's it, Gallo." "Roman!" Gallo's voice carried the edge of a man who understood the operational implications and was not certain his understanding was correct. Marchetti is going to read that as, "Let him read it however he wants." Roman watched Petrov pull the car to the curb. "We're not demonstrating anything tonight. We're keeping our people without violence. That's the play." A longer pause. "Understood." He got in the car. Petrov pulled into traffic. The city moved around them, indifferent and enormous. Roman sat with the phone in his lap and his hands still, and he thought about what he had just done. The choice he had just made, the kind of choice that a man in his position did not make without consequences, without the slow erosion of the fear that kept the structure intact. He thought about all the choices of the last 72 hours and how each one had been, in the moment of making it, the only one he could make honestly, and how the accumulation of honest choices had produced something he did not yet have a name for. His phone lit up, a text from Miranda. "Doctor says BP is stabilizing. Good night ahead, she's resting." He typed back, "Thank you." He sat with the city moving past the windows and the dark coming down over everything, and he felt, underneath the exhaustion, underneath the operational noise, underneath the specific, unresolved weight of 15 years of decisions he could not undo, something that he identified slowly with the caution of a man handling something unfamiliar. The faint, strange sensation of a man who had stopped pretending he was something he wasn't and did not yet know who he was going to be instead, but was, for the first time in a very long time, willing to find out. His phone lit again. Not Miranda this time. A news alert. Vivica Hart holds press conference, accuses Roman Dragunov of systematic coercion, calls for criminal investigation, provides recording excerpts to assembled media. He read it once. Then he put the phone face down on the seat beside him and looked out at the dark city and understood that tomorrow was going to be the hardest day he had faced in 15 years, and that he was going to face it in a hospital waiting room while his daughter was being born, and that there was absolutely nothing he could do tonight to change either of those facts, and that the only move left was to sit with that and let it be what it was. Petrov drove. The city lights slid past the windows in long, wet streaks. Roman closed his eyes. He did not sleep, but he stayed still, which was close enough. He was in the waiting room on the 6th floor when his daughter was born. Not in the delivery room. That had been Serena's decision, made the previous evening with the quiet finality that characterized all of her decisions, and he had accepted it without argument because arguing would have been the wrong kind of man, and he was trying, with the focused deliberateness of someone learning a new language in middle age, to be a different kind. Dana, Serena's sister, had gone in. Miranda had stayed in the waiting room with Roman for the first hour, working on her tablet, saying nothing unless he spoke first, which he mostly did not. At 4:17 in the morning, Miranda's phone lit up with a message. She read it, set the tablet down, and looked at Roman. "She's here," Miranda said. "Both of them are fine." He put his hands flat on his knees. He looked at the floor. He sat that way for approximately 10 seconds, which was the time it took for the information to move through him completely. Not the processing of data, but the specific, unmanageable sensation of something irrevocable having occurred. The world having divided cleanly into before and after, with no negotiation possible regarding which side of the line you now occupied. "Can I see her?" he said. "Give them 20 minutes. He gave them 23. Clara Dragunov was 6 pounds, 11 ounces, and she was asleep when he first saw her, which he was grateful for because it meant no one was watching his face when the full weight of her arrived. Serena was holding her, reclined in the bed, exhausted in the deep physical way of someone whose body had just completed something enormous. Dana stood near the window. The room had the strange, pressurized quiet of a place where something significant had just finished happening. The equipment quieter now, the light softer, the air carrying the specific quality of aftermath. Roman stood at the side of the bed and looked at his daughter. She was red and small, and her eyes were closed, and her hands were curled at her chin in the unconscious, complete self-containment of a being who had not yet discovered that the world had edges. She had dark hair. And this hit him with the force of something absurd and precise simultaneously. She had his jaw. Serena had been right. Even this new, even this small, the architecture of the face was identifiable. "You can hold her," Serena said. Her voice was rough with exhaustion. She looked at him, looking at Clara, and something in her expression was careful and open and tired all at once. He sat in the chair beside the bed. Serena transferred Clara to him with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been holding her for 23 minutes and already understood the mechanics of it. And Roman received his daughter with both hands and the specific, acute terror of a man who had handled dangerous things his entire life and had never held anything this consequential. Clara did not wake. She made a small sound. Not distress, just the random vocalization of a sleeping infant processing the change of contact, and resettled, her weight redistributing against his forearm, her face turned slightly toward his chest. He did not speak. There was nothing to say that would have been adequate, and he had learned in the last 72 hours that the impulse to fill silence with language was sometimes a form of avoidance. He held his daughter, and she breathed against him, and the monitors made their soft sounds, and the November dark sat outside the windows, and Roman Dragunov, who had survived federal investigations and rival organizations and the slow, accumulated wreckage of a life built on control, sat in a hospital chair and felt the specific dissolution of something that had been held rigid inside him for so long that he had stopped recognizing it as tension. It did not feel like victory. It felt like the end of a very long war. The press conference footage had been playing on loop across every network since 11 p.m. the previous evening. Roman watched none of it that night. He saw the clips the following morning on Frederick's tablet in the hospital corridor, Vivica Hart at a podium in the lobby of her real estate firm's flagship office, her composure immaculate, her legal team arrayed behind her, her statement delivered with the precise, measured emotion of someone who had rehearsed until the performance was invisible. She described a relationship built on systematic pressure. She described transactions she claimed to have entered under duress. She played 2 excerpts from the recordings, 30-second clips, carefully selected, stripped of context in the way that clips were always stripped of context, which was why they were selected. She did not name specific dollar figures. She named Roman 7 times in 4 minutes. She was very good at it. He acknowledged that privately, with the specific cold respect of a professional recognizing craft. The coercion narrative is gaining traction, Frederick said, standing beside him in the corridor. 3 major outlets picked it up overnight. The question now is whether we respond publicly or let the legal process. What did investigators say when you called this morning? Roman said. They confirmed the recordings are under review as part of the broader financial investigation. They are not at this stage treating the coercion allegation as a separate criminal matter, but Vivica's legal team is pushing for that designation. They won't get it, Roman said, not with false confidence, with the flat assessment of a man who had been in that federal conference room and understood what the investigators were actually building. They're building a financial crimes case. Vivica is a cooperating witness with her own exposure. Her coercion narrative is a mitigation strategy, not a standalone accusation. They'll weigh it accordingly. That assessment may be correct, Frederick said carefully. It may take time to prove out. Then we wait. Frederick looked at him. You're very calm. My daughter was born 4 hours ago, Roman said. Everything else is noise I'll manage when I get to it. Frederick had nothing to add to that. The noise was substantial. Over the following 2 weeks, it moved in the way of media cycles. Loud, then louder, then gradually superseded by other stories. The attention fragmenting and redistributing according to the logic of a world with an infinite supply of things to pay attention to. Roman gave one additional on-record statement, through Frederick, responding to the coercion allegation with specific documentation of Vivica's voluntary participation and financial benefit in each transaction she claimed to have entered under duress. He did not hold a press conference. He did not go on television. He did not perform aggrievement or dignity. He provided documentation and let it sit. The federal investigation continued. It would continue for several more months, moving through the architecture of his financial empire with the systematic thoroughness of a process that was not susceptible to acceleration or negotiation. Roman's cooperation meant that the process had access to things it would have taken years to uncover independently, which shortened the timeline and shaped the outcome in ways his attorneys were still calculating. The honest accounting was this. He was going to pay a significant legal price. Several of his business structures were going to be dismantled under federal supervision. He was going to spend a considerable portion of the next 2 years managing legal proceedings that would, when they concluded, leave him with a fraction of the financial architecture he had spent 15 years building. He had known this when he picked up the phone and called the investigators. He had known it and chosen it anyway. Kostov was indicted in the third week. He had, in the end, not been at Roman's office at 7 in the morning because he had been on a flight to a country without an extradition treaty, which was itself information, the kind of choice that told you everything about what a man had been managing beneath the surface of his loyalty. Roman had not been surprised. He had been tired, in the specific way of someone who had trusted imperfectly for a long time and was done pretending that imperfect trust was adequate. Whitfield resigned from the Foundation Board the same week. 3 other board members followed. The remaining members, operating under the independent governance review that Roman had initiated, voted to confirm Serena Vale as executive director with a reformed board structure. Serena accepted from a hospital room by phone 3 days after Clara's birth in a 2-sentence statement that Miranda released on her behalf. Roman read the statement. He did not add to it. It was hers. But he saw Clara for the second time on a Tuesday afternoon, 9 days after the birth. Serena had called Miranda, who had called Frederick, who had relayed the invitation with the diplomatic precision of someone managing an exchange of extraordinary significance, as though it were a routine scheduling matter. Roman arrived at Serena's apartment at 2 in the afternoon with nothing in his hands, because bringing something had seemed like a performance of a kind he didn't want to perform, and Serena opened the door in a sweater and loose trousers and looked at him with the straightforward, unsentimental appraisal of a woman who had decided to try something difficult. "She's been awake for an hour," Serena said. "She'll want to eat again in about 40 minutes, so you have a window." He followed her into the apartment. It was a good apartment, warm, ordered without being sterile, with the particular quality of a home that reflected a specific person rather than a generic aspiration. Books on the shelves he recognized from their marriage. New ones he didn't. A corner of the living room that had been reorganized to accommodate a bassinet and a changing table and the infrastructure of new parenthood. Clara was in the bassinet, awake, looking at the ceiling with the profound, unfocused attention of an infant discovering that the world had visual dimensions. Roman sat on the floor beside the bassinet, not in a chair. On the floor, at her level, because that seemed correct in a way he could not entirely articulate. He looked at her, and she looked at the ceiling, and then, with the slow, effortful tracking of new eyes, she found his face. She looked at him. He looked at her. Whatever was passing between them was not language and was not strategy and was not anything he had a professional framework for. "Hi," he said quietly. Serena was in the kitchen, visible through the open doorway, making tea with her back to the room. He was aware that she was giving him this deliberately, the private moment, the space, the 10 feet of physical distance that allowed something to happen without witnesses. He reached a finger toward Clara's hand. She grasped it with the reflexive, absolute grip of an infant who did not yet know what trust was, but practiced it with her whole body anyway. Her fingers were impossibly small. He felt the pressure of them, and the world reduced to exactly that. He stayed for 2 hours. He fed her once, with Serena beside him showing him how, and he held the bottle wrong at first, and Serena adjusted his hand without commentary, and the correction was so ordinary and so devoid of scorekeeping that it landed as something more significant than any of the preceding weeks of legal maneuvering. When he left, Serena walked him to the door. "Same time Thursday?" she said. "Yes," he said. He went down to the street. He stood outside for a moment before Petrov pulled up, and he looked at the ordinary city. A woman walking a dog, 2 teenagers on bikes, a delivery van double-parked, and he thought about how much of his life he had spent trying to make the world conform to his requirements, and how thoroughly and specifically the world had declined. He saw his therapist for the first time on a Friday morning in December, in an office on the 8th floor of a building on North Welland, the kind of office that was deliberately unremarkable. 2 chairs, a low table, a window with the blinds half drawn. The therapist's name was Dr. Ellison, a man in his early 60s who had been recommended by the attorney handling Roman's cooperation agreement. Roman sat in the chair that was not behind the desk and looked at Dr. Ellison and said nothing for approximately 30 seconds. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say," Roman said. "You're not supposed to say anything specific," Dr. Ellison said. "What made you come today?" Roman thought about it. "My daughter," he said. I want to be someone she's not eventually going to have to explain to people. Dr. Ellison wrote nothing, which Roman noted. What kind of person are you now? The kind that built things that hurt people, Roman said. The kind that confused control with love and called it protection. He paused. The kind that's been very competent at survival and very poor at everything else. Dr. Ellison looked at him steadily. And you want to change that. I want to find out if I can. Those are different things. Roman looked at him. I know, he said. He came back the following Friday, and the Friday after that. 3 months after Clara's birth, on a morning in late February that was cold but carrying the first suggestion that cold was not permanent, Roman met Serena at the foundation. She had been back at work for 6 weeks, operating under the new governance structure, managing the rebuild with the focused intensity that she applied to everything she cared about. The foundation's mission had been publicly reaffirmed. Its financials were under independent oversight. Its programs had not been suspended during the transition. Serena had fought for that specifically, had argued before the board that the people served by the foundation should not bear the cost of the failures of its administration. She won that argument. She generally won the argument she chose to make. Roman came to the foundation not for a meeting and not through attorney channels. He came because he had asked Serena if he could, and she had said yes. He came to sign the final documentation severing all formal connections between his business interests and the foundation, the last procedural step in a process that had taken 3 months of legal work and had cost him, in concrete financial terms, more than he would have paid in almost any other resolution of the situation. He signed the documents in her office while she sat across the desk and Miranda witnessed, and when it was done, he set the pen down and looked at Serena and said, "It's clean now." She looked at the documents, then at him. "I know. What you built here is worth protecting," he said. "I should have protected it differently from the start." She was quiet for a moment. "You're doing it now," she said. "That matters." He nodded. He stood. He picked up his coat. "Roman." She stopped him at the door, and he turned. She was sitting behind her desk in the office she had built into something real, and she looked at him with the full, unguarded assessment she had used the night Clara was born. No armor, no performance, just the direct, complicated regard of a woman who had been through the particular intimacy of shared disaster and was still standing. "Thursday visits. Claire's going to start recognizing you consistently. She may already be. I wanted you to know that." He held the doorframe. "I know," he said. "I can see it." "She reaches for you," Serena said. "She started doing it last week." He stood with that, with the specific, disproportionate significance of an infant reaching for someone. The purely physical declaration that a person has become known, has become safe, has become someone the body moves toward without being told. He had managed organizations, brokered arrangements that moved significant money, and maintained complex structures of loyalty, and none of it had produced anything with the specific weight of that sentence. "I'll be there Thursday," he said. "I know you will," she said. He left the foundation and walked to the street and did not take the car. He walked. 3 blocks, 4, 5, through the February city that was slowly reconsidering winter, the cold air carrying the faint suggestion of something eventually warmer. He passed a dry cleaner, a coffee shop, a playground that was empty in the weekday morning, the swings moving slightly in a wind that was not unpleasant. He thought about Vivica. Her case had been resolved the previous month. She had entered a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors and would pay substantial financial penalties and serve a period of supervised release, the coercion allegation having been assessed by investigators as the mitigation strategy he had identified it to be. It had gained no criminal traction. He bore her no particular malice. He understood what she had done and why she had done it, and the understanding had not produced forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness implied a wound he wasn't certain he'd sustained, because the betrayal had clarified things rather than broken them. She had shown him who she was. He had shown himself who he was. Both pieces of information had been necessary. He thought about Marchetti, who had tested the southern corridor once more in January and found the principles immovable, and had retreated to his own district with the particular quiet of someone who had taken a read on a situation and decided the cost exceeded the opportunity. The organization Roman had spent 15 years building was contracting, several structures gone, others under legal review, the financial territory smaller than it had been. He had not yet decided what it would look like when the legal process concluded. He had begun to suspect that what it looked like when it concluded would be substantially different from what it had been before, not by external force alone, but by his own deliberate dismantling, because there were parts of it he no longer wanted. That was a thought he held carefully, with the recognition that it was incomplete and that the incompleteness was appropriate. He had not become a different man in 3 months. He had begun the process of examining what kind of man he could still become, which was different and harder and considerably less cinematic. He stopped at a park he had not intended to stop at, a small municipal park, 3 benches and a path and a stand of trees that had dropped everything but were beginning at the tips of their branches to show the faint suggestion of what was coming. He sat on a bench and put his hands on his knees and let the city go around him. He thought about Thursday, about the apartment on the east side of the Carver district, about Clara, who was 3 months old and had dark hair and his jaw and Serena's eyes, who had begun reaching for him when he arrived, who slept with the absolute, unguarded confidence of a being who had decided that the people holding her were adequate for the purpose. He thought about what it meant to be adequate for that purpose, about how different adequate felt from the things he had spent his life building, how much smaller it was, how much harder, how much more real. He thought about the morning he had stood in the Harrington Grand Ballroom and seen Serena walk in and understood that everything he thought he had managed had not been managed at all, that the control had been a surface, that beneath the surface everything he had neglected had been accumulating with the patient, indifferent persistence of water finding its level. He did not regret that night, not the way he had expected to, in the first days after. The night had been the beginning of the only honest sequence of his adult life, and whatever it had cost, and it had cost significantly, and the costs were not finished, the alternative had been the continuation of a life built on the wrong foundation, and he had been living in that building long enough to understand what it did to the people inside it. He sat in the park until the cold reminded him it was February, and that sitting on a bench in February without moving was the kind of thing that produced consequences. Then he stood, straightened his coat, and began walking back toward the street. He passed the stand of bare trees on his way out. He looked at the tips of the branches, the small, tight points of green that were barely visible, barely there, requiring the specific attention of someone looking for them rather than looking past them. 3 months away from becoming something, patient with the distance. He looked at them for a moment. Then he turned up his collar against the cold and walked back into the city, toward the work that remained, toward Thursday, toward the long and unfinished and entirely necessary process of becoming the person his daughter was already, in the absolute democracy of her reaching hands, insisting that he was. The story ends here, in an ordinary park on an ordinary street, with no empire left worth naming and no war worth fighting, and a man who has finally understood that the most significant thing he will ever do is show up, on Thursdays and on every other day after that, and be worth reaching for.